we go. That's good.
All right. All right, guys. So I heard about your podcast, and I was wondering what is the purpose of it, and like what is the essence of creativity? Because I seen you y'all want it to be as common as a loaf of bread. So elaborate on that.
There's not white. That's wholemeal bread. We're talking the healthy stuff here, which is maybe a little bit less common in many households.
Yeah, definitely.
Look, the purpose of our podcast, I suppose, as we say, is to explore the intersection between business and creativity, and to open up the discussion about creativity in business. Mm-hmm. Both Chris and I have had careers in. I was an architect for my career. Chris has been in branding, but now we work in a space where we, I suppose, empower other people's creativity. And the podcast was a two-way thing of meeting, other like-minded people, primarily, and as well as exploring our own ideas. Chris?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think more and more businesses are saying we need people to be creative, and we want, that dreadful jargon where we want to pivot. We've got to be more agile, all of that stuff. And so the brief to employees is to be creative. But I think, without realizing it, big businesses grind the creativity out of people. They have systems and procedures and ways of working that mean if you have a great idea, it's very hard for a business to adopt it and think about it. They just know that's not the way we do things. So that's, I think, is why it's such an interesting topic. Is businesses want creativity, but they don't know how to embrace it. They don't know what creativity looks like. They don't know how to use it. And so that's really, I think, what's behind the whole idea, is how can business really harness the power of creativity? And I think what we're learning as a side effect is that people are much more sad if people's creativity is being celebrated at work, if they feel like they're contributing in a creative way, they're much happier. And so I think we're discovering there's many other benefits to creativity than just helping companies become bigger and more profitable.
That makes a lot of sense. I didn't think about it like that, because companies do like really grind people to use their creativity, but it's like, how are they like backing them to like pull out this creativity?
Yeah, I have this theory that actually, if you get the kind of big companies in a quiet moment, they actually would say that creativity is kind of a dangerous word. It's disruptive. Creative people question things that shouldn't be questioned, and I'm sometimes when I in my day job, when I'm selling to business, you kind of play down that idea of creativity, because they might think you'll just make life hard for us here. So you talk about innovation, you might talk about being agile, and how you deliver that is some strange stuff, which is actually a creative process, but you only introduce that later on when they're kind of comfortable with what you're doing. So it's I think it's a double-edged sword for many big businesses. They actually don't want, they call for creativity, but they are worried when it arrives. Maybe it's like that strange dish you have in a restaurant. You kind of looks exciting on the menu, but when it turns up, you think, why did I order this stuff?
Chris, I think, Joe, I think that is a key point. I think a lot of businesses don't understand really what creativity is. Mm-hmm. And they obviously think it's something else. They don't understand it's the start of a process which ends in innovation and change, and they misunderstand it. I think it's interesting. We were speaking earlier about your own path of, being a creative soul and looking for ways of expressing that creativity. The reality is that we're all the same. Some people are more overt in that experience than others, but deep down we're all that way. And I think business, Chris and I talk about the 3 C's of conformity, compliance, and control, and those things are needed in businesses to make businesses successful. But the reality is that the creativity is needed as well, but unfortunately there's not really room for the 4 C's, so to speak. So that's a big part of it.
Okay, that's definitely true. So my next question to piggyback on that, as far as like running a business, well, not running a business, but being a creative, can you differentiate from being a hobbyist and an actual business owner? Because I feel like a lot of people have that internal struggle and they figure like, okay, maybe I could start this as a business, but maybe I can like, maybe this could just be a hobby for me. Like I don't have to like pursue this as a money grab.
Boy, Jared, if we knew the answer to that question, a clear answer, then we might be doing something else.
No, but it's interesting because Paul and I have come to different that question about how our private projects, our personal creativity intersects with business. And we're in slightly different places. I think it'd be really interesting to compare the different answers for Paul and I. Yeah. Paul, you should go. Paul is an accomplished painter, and he's won prizes and kind of well-known, if you don't mind my saying so, a well-known artist. So you should start with the answer to that great question.
Okay. Look, I think, actually, I'm going to revert to, I think the best way to, describe it or to explore the subject is through Turning Pro by, what's his name? His name escapes me at the moment. Do you know the book, Jarrett? Turning Pro by, he wrote, do you know the, anyway. But I think the difference really comes down to choice. I think a lot of people, and what I mean about that is the thought process. A lot of people go into, creating something which should be a hobby, and they don't think more deeply about it. They just go along with the flow. They start to do some things, and I think really what it comes down to is about this conscious creativity. So really be conscious about how you want your creativity going into the world. And I think part of that is the misunderstanding by a lot of people that you can be creative without being an artist or a photographer or something else. There's lots of ways you can be creative, in your life and your work without being sort of, overtly creative. My own thing, as an architect, I've mostly painted for most of my career. At various times, I did think about becoming a professional painter. It was, I suppose, a professional hobby. I used to have, major art shows. So it was a bit of like a double career. Now it is, I still paint regularly and I sell regularly. It's not a hobby, but now it's become an integral part of what I do. So I write, I speak, and I paint. So I'm an artist, writer, speaker. And for me, those, three aspects are so important. Whilst I'm probably all those things, I'm a better painter than I am a speaker or a writer. I need them all for my balance. And I think this is the thing about, a lot of people don't understand that, creativity is not relative. People think it's relative. They go, I can't be creative because, my God, that guy is such a great painter. I could never do that. But creativity is a self-expression. It's not relative. I've probably gone a bit off track there, Chris.
Well, that's it. So I think it was a great question because I describe myself as a speaker, a trainer, a coach, and I don't in my business talk about my photography. And I kind of pretty much keep them separate. So I shoot almost every day of the week, and I have a couple of private projects that I do just for me. And some of my clients know that I'm a photographer. I host exhibitions and things like that. But for most people, I'm a coach, a trainer, a consultant who just talks about innovation and creativity and knows how to advise on it. I have actually had one client specifically who said, I was running a training session on storytelling. And she said, please bring some of your pictures into the workshop because those images tell stories. They've got stories inside them. And I was delighted to do that, but it's pretty much the only time I've overtly taken my passion for photography into a business context. Paul and I have chatted about this, either this link or this lack of link. And I don't know the right answer. One of the reasons I think it's healthy to keep them separate is it keeps me very free to do whatever I want. It's if there's no money attached to it, I can follow it as I want to. And you're not double guessing all the time. Is there a market for this? Well, how will this play out commercially? And you sort of think if nobody buys these images, I don't mind that the main audience is me, myself. If somebody happens to buy them, then that's great too. But it's not like a source of income. But that's where I'm at, and it could change in the future. I do actually teach photography occasionally, but that's pretty much just a kind of a fun sideline. Whereas Paul describes himself as a painter. Paul has stood on the stage at TED and shown some of the images that he drew while speakers were speaking, and so he's been very much more overt about the connection between his art and his business. Is that fair, Paul? Because we are in slightly different places.
Yeah, no, I think that is fair. But I sort of pick up a point that you said there about one of the big differences about doing it for money, not for doing it for money. Once you start doing it for money, I have found that it affects what you're doing. And no matter how hard you try, all of a sudden it's like, oh boy, am I, people are going to like this. And you start, prejudging or wondering what other people think. But when you do it for yourself, then you don't care. You're only really trying to please yourself. And I think it's a big difference with turning pro, because I think there's two parts of it. One is you turn pro with an art form, and which is about making an income from it and surviving on it. But the other part is probably the more important part is actually staying true to your creative essence, what you're trying to create, and not then respond to the market, because in such a way that it controls what your output is. And I think that's the problem that we have, generally in society and businesses. We're all just doing what people tell us to do. And what's the point of, removing a boss or a business as controlling you to then having this audience that controls you? So I think the biggest point of turning pro is to be able to maintain that creative essence in the spirit and not rely on just responding to what people like or want to do.
Okay.
That's so true, Paul. Because I know a lot of my images have they're multiple images brought together, but a lot of them start with a seascape. And I know what people like to buy are pretty seascapes, a nice sun, some sand, beautiful waves, or whatever it is. And it kind of, and we've all seen those too many times, but people like to buy that stuff. And so it would be easy for me to kind of go, I know what people want to buy, and I could just start to turn it out. And it wouldn't be wouldn't be my creative essence. So yeah, I've been there too, Paul. I know that.
So you guys said you met a year and a half ago, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. How did you meet?
Paul.
Well, look, we were both. Chris was an alumni of a group of thought leaders, and I just joined this group, and we were introduced by a person that was doing my induction into this course, and he said, "You should speak to Chris." And so now Chris, both and I are alumni. Our group is he and I, and we chatted on the phone, and then about a month later, we was right at the start of COVID, and we had a Zoom call, and we just started riffing about creativity. And I said, I wish we'd recorded this, because I could have got some of the text, for my blog, and because it's really interesting stuff that's coming out of my mouth because it's been drawn out by you. And he said, let's do better than that. Let's just record it and invite a few people in to listen. So we started a sort of a webinar where we invited people in, and then after a while, we got a bit bored with each other. So we started inviting some guests then, and then we thought, we should do this as a podcast. And so as we said earlier, we live in different cities in Australia, and because of COVID and the restrictions on travel in this country, we've never physically been in the same room. And what we've done, I think Chris was explaining before we started that this podcast was really about exploring creativity in business. But what's come out of it is we used to have it about that. Our podcast was we wanted people to bring an idea, a story, a quote, and a challenge for us. but what we realized in the end, what the most powerful thing was the idea and the story. So now Chris and I are soon to launch a program which is around ideas and stories that matter, about how to really engage, inspire, and connect with an audience. And it's been really fantastic. So so it's been a fantastic collaboration. We're sort of worried about whether we should actually ever be in the same room together. Maybe the pheromones or something will say, oh, actually, I don't particularly, it's not something about you. I prefer seeing you like this rather than,
It may be when I see Paul's legs or he sees my legs for the first time, comes like, no idea, your legs would be like that. That freaks me out.
What do you mean you wear those sort of shoes? Oh my God, I can't have a friend to wear those sort of shoes.
No, it was great. With the guy that introduced us to each other, I mean, he spotted Paul had this, habit's the wrong word, but a visual artist as well as somebody who's building his own business. And myself with my photography, building a business and being a photographer as well. And he spotted that we have the same kind of way of looking at the world. That's why he thought we should meet. And and we've got on really well. It's amazing that relationship now is 18 months old. I'm hoping we will meet before too long as Australia gradually opens up some of its internal borders. Because I think there's so much more that we could do together, and it's actually very helpful. Because we have this passion for creativity, but I think anybody running their own business by themselves, to have somebody else just to kind of go, look, this is happening, and what do you think about this? And it may not be to do with creativity; it may be to do with my computer not working or those kind of everyday things. And somebody else goes, oh, I know a person that might be able to fix that, or don't worry about it, you're fretting about something. So just daily simple things that you need a little bit of support with, having somebody else that you can chat to them about it.
Yeah, it's definitely, it makes a difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So my next question, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the other thing from the point of view of the podcast. A lot of people have fed back to us that it's great to have two people as the hosts of the podcast. I don't know if you're finding having two guests on your podcast, it makes a different vibe. It makes it much more like a chat. Whereas if it's one-on-one, it's much more intensive because you've always got to be thinking about how to keep the conversation going. But with three people, it's just sort of, it does itself.
Yeah, that's true. It makes the conversation flow easier.
Yeah.
I have a bit of a different view because it's very hard sometimes for me to get a question in.
So my next question is, so whoever wants to start, your background as well, brand marketing strategy for you, Chris, and basically for Paul being an artist, like how did those start for you individually?
You go, Chris.
Okay, I'm feeling very self-conscious now. Maybe. So I mean, I kind of started my career in big companies, big branding companies. So kind of as brand manager on shampoo brands or beer brands and so on. And I kind of worked my way up the corporate ladder, building the career that kind of my mum and dad would be proud of, I think it's fair to say. And I got to a point where I had quite a senior role, and I hated it. I suddenly realized I was becoming effectively I was running a team of people, and I was very bad at it and no longer doing what I was good at. So I kind of jumped out of the corporate world, and then via smaller agencies, smaller creative agencies, I learned how to use creativity, use innovation in the world of business, and finally set up my business about 10 years ago. And I remember it vividly. It was actually started in 2013 because I wrote on my first ever business card, established 2013, and it was a joke. It's kind of like, I just made this thing up, and it was meant to look like it was old, even though it had just been made up. And now, it's what is that, 8-9 years ago. So it does look like it's been around for a while. So in a way, I'm a corporate refugee. I know my way around big business, but I'm better off helping it from the outside rather than being on the inside.
Gotcha. Okay. What about you, Paul?
Well, mine's interesting because, as I said, I've been an architect my whole career, and I've always wanted to be an architect, although I did consider being an artist at one time, when I was selecting my career, or an engineer, because that's what my father was and grandfather. But in the end, I didn't understand, and whilst I built a successful business and I was an architect for 35 years, what I didn't understand was the time frame of architecture, and I found the time frame very difficult because I'm much more of an ideas person. I like new ideas all the time, and a building can take years to come into to fruition. But amongst that, when I started painting, and I started painting in my 30s, about 10 years into my practice, whilst it's a visual medium, the essence of my painting was always about the title. As an example, I did a painting of a border collie sheepdog standing in front of a round watermelon. It was called Melancholy, the dog standing there. So it was all about the titles of the paintings. And what I've realised, especially over the last couple of years in my involvement with Chris, that I'm actually a visual storyteller. And I always use this technique in my architecture and, as I said, the paintings, but it's very different. It's a very different thing to having something that's much more, visceral. So really my journey is one about, finding my true inner self. Is not so much about whether it's being a writer or a painter or an architect, but it's actually about the layer underneath, which for me is about being a visual storyteller. And that visual storytelling, the visual isn't necessarily about illustrations or images. For me, that is very much about now even about creating word pictures or using other methods to illustrate a point. And so that's my journey, and that's why I think I love so much this platform, being able to come onto your show to tell my story and hear Chris's story, but also to hear other people's stories along the way on the podcast, because that's really in the essence what it's about for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, basically this is what the podcast is for, like bringing people on and just asking their background, what it's like being a creative. And because I've seen plenty of people and all of them have different stories, all of them have different backgrounds. It's just to understand how the creative mind works. That's what I think really why I'm interested in this podcast.
It's interesting. We have an episode, and I don't remember which one it is, but the fellow Rory Jeffs, who at the time of the interview was the CEO of Opera Australia, very, very large, one of Australia's premier arts organisations. And his story is very interesting because he's English, he's trained in Oxford, I think, to be a professional singer, and he got his degree and his honours and stuff. But when he looked around the room, and whilst I said creativity is not relative, he realised that he would never make it in the professional world because whilst he was a good singer, he wasn't a great singer. It's only the great singers that make it to great success. So, but he loved the industry and loved music, so he became, went into administration and rose up to become the CEO of large organisations. So, and he has a really incredibly credible sort of perception about his own creativity and this whole idea of being creative and practical and pragmatic at the same time. And so for me, just what you were saying there about drawing people's story, for me, that was, that's someone that Chris knows, and I didn't really even know of him, but absolutely fascinating and gave me an insight into something when I wouldn't have thought that the depth of creativity that this man had. I knew to be a CEO of that organisation, you have to have a certain level of creativity, but the depth of it was astounding.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Chris?
Yeah, I think actually Paul's got me. I was thinking more about Rory Jeffs at the CEO of Opera Australia. I'm at a loss, Jared. Jared, remind me, what was the question again? I lost my flow.
Oh, well, I was actually about, basically about your background and everything, but I was like, did you want to piggyback anything off anything Paul said?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think we're learning about that everyone we've interviewed has got huge amount of creativity in them. And we've had people that are very obviously creative, like photographers and artists and so on. But we've interviewed chief executive of a bank. We've interviewed a relative of Paul's who's a major general in the army, people who you wouldn't imagine have any kind of creative flair to them. And of course they all do. They may not be visual artists, they may not be actors, but in the day work that they do, they're expressing themselves and they're solving problems in new ways. And so I think we're confirming that everyone is creative. And interesting, particularly when you speak to leaders, I think there's a good understanding that even if you're not the kind of person that jumps at a paintbrush all the time or a camera, there are plenty of ways to be creative and plenty of ways to express your creativity. Yeah, we've never had anybody saying, no, I'm not coming on your show, I'm not creative, or, you know what I mean? You've got the wrong person.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like everybody has like the creative gene in them. It's just how you can unlock that creative gene. Because people probably feel like they're not a creative, but in some form of life, it blossoms. You just don't realize it.
It's interesting. I think that being creative, to express your creativity is an act of bravery, because you're putting a little bit of yourself out there and inviting people to comment on it and judge it. And there's every risk that they'll judge it negatively, and that's kind of that can hurt. So I think one of the reasons people say I'm not creative is that they've learned that it can wound you if you say, here's my painting, and somebody says it's rubbish. That's a wounding process, and you learn, right, I'm not going to be creative now, I'm not going to express myself. It's safer that way. So one of the things I think that really supports creativity, whether it's creativity in a business sense or outside of business sense, is a kind of environment where people make you feel safe, that they don't judge you quickly, that they support you, they ask intelligent questions, and you feel safe to say, here's where I'm going with my creativity. It's particularly true in work. I mean, work, we're all trained and paid to say, well, prove it, analyze it. Is it better than we've done before? Show me the numbers, all of these things, which are all ways of slicing through an idea and killing it. So one of the things I think I'm passionate about is if companies want to be more creative, they have to be able to create an environment where people feel safe to express their ideas. And it's hard, that, because they're not trained on it, they're not rewarded on it. And usually you get promoted for being tougher and more analytical and more brutal with ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't think about that. That's how companies usually are, because I feel like a lot of companies are starting to understand that concept, that they have to help their people be more creative, because at the end of the day, that will help the business grow. But it's like, what will they do to help stroke that creativity? And also, like people work for money, so like, how will they be compensated for this creativity at the end of the day to keep them satisfied?
Well, particularly, that's a really good point, is that often the creative idea takes you in a direction and you don't know where it's going to lead. And you have to let that creative idea go for a bit and let it mold. And sometimes it goes nowhere, or sometimes it doesn't take you somewhere useful, but other times it can take you somewhere much more useful than you would otherwise have got. So you need leaders who can say, fine, let's run with that for a while. Let's see what happens. Let's let this strange thought go for a while. It's just that so many leaders have got to where they've got to by being, tough and show me the numbers on that. What's the payback on that? What's the deadline? And all these things which can make you go, oh, all right, then I won't bother with that idea anymore. I'll just go back to what we normally do. It's safer.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to add something along to the conversation, and it was something, Jarrett, when you started that about, that we're all creative and a lot of people don't understand it. I mentioned earlier the book Turning Pro. It's come back to me now. It's Stephen Pressfield wrote it, but I've just a quote that I quite like from him, and it's just, whilst it doesn't really answer the question you asked earlier, but he says, when we get what we get when we turn pro is we find our power. we find our will in our voice, and we find our self-respect, we become who we always were, but had until then been afraid to embrace and live out. And I think that's whether that's, you know, turning pro, as in professional artist or professional creative, or just really turning pro in terms of embracing our own creativity. And that's what it's really about. And I think that, you know, I know my crusade, and I think Chris shares it, is really trying to give people a good shake and say,
yes.
well, sort of like, you know, one of those light sticks, and we want to give them a good crack.
Good crack.
And they illuminate, because you know, they've got it inside there, but until they can actually just have that shift, and sometimes they're just like a chiropractor, just a good crack. And then, oh my God, I'm lit up. So,
Paul, I completely agree with you. I love that analogy. Give people a good shake. For me, the most insulting thing somebody can say about any of my work is it's okay. You know, if they say I hate it with a passion, it's, oh my God, it's the last. Then I'm really happy. That's a good shake. It's challenged them. It's provoked them. If they love it, that's good too. But yeah, it's fine. You know. That reminds you, that would be horrible, that it's just okay. It's vanilla flavored. It hasn't shaken them up. So I agree with you. I like my work to give people a good shake.
I love it. And the book is by
Stephen Pressfield.
Okay, so I found it.
He wrote The War of Art, Turning Pro, Doing the Work. Look, if you've never read them, they're great books because they're quite pithy, very, very short chapters, you know, sometimes not even a couple hundred words, but very poignant. I think the first one I read was Turning Pro, but both Doing the Work and the other one is really fantastic as well.
Okay, I definitely have to check out that book then.
Paul, it's interesting that point about you become who you always were and turning pro. I hadn't really thought about that. I think it's one reason you can produce work and kind of not worry about people if they hate it or they don't like it, because your work is actually kind of, well, that's who I am. You're seeing who I am, and I'm stuck with it one way. So I don't feel threatened if you like it or you don't like it. It's kind of it's what it is.
Actually, I think there's another layer to it. And it's a bit of a dichotomy, but I had a very good coach, and I suppose in many ways a spiritual teacher, and he had a saying which I suggest was probably a Sufi saying or something, and it sounds a little bit sort of self-contradictory, but what he says, you can't become who you are, you can only unbecome what you're not. And I think that what happens is, you know, this non-creativity and this conformity, you know, we put a mask on, we put a layer on. And really we say you can't become who you are, meaning you're always your real essence. You can only sort of take off the layers to reveal what's underneath. And I think that our education, our employment, you know, our goals put layers on us, you know, we wear layers where we don't go, this is not really who I am. And I think in the end, the commonality of everyone is this creative essence that we have, you know, inside of some people. But it's like a seed, you know, it stays there, and a seed can stay for, you know, decades and not, you know, until it germinates. And that seed is in everyone. And so that part of my mission is to try to get all those seeds to germinate.
I love it. So yeah, I want to thank you guys for being on. Those questions really sparked up the conversation, and it was great having you guys here.
Jared, thank you very much. I agree. It's been great being on your show. Really appreciate those questions. And it's great, as I said, for us to be guests on a podcast rather than hosts. So I appreciate that.
Isn't it always weird when, like, you're used to being the host, and then when you come on as a guest, it's like I don't know how this is going to go. Like, you know, I'm used to asking the questions.
Yes. No, exactly. You know, but it's been great. It's been great, you know, to meet you. I think we don't do it. We don't do enough. In fact, you know, we seem to be Australia. Maybe it's because of the COVID cutoff. You know, before that, I spent many years going to TED, so I know a lot of people from around the world. But we tend to be very insular down here. I find.
I gotta go to Australia, man. I really want to go.
I highly recommend it. Well, I wasn't born in Australia, so I made a decision to come here, and I highly recommend it. It's a wonderful country.
Nice.
Mind you, I love the States.
Where you originally from?
From the UK. I'm originally British, and so I've
Okay.
only been in the UK, I don't know, 20 years or so. So I got fed up of cold, wet, rainy winters. And now, even though it's October, we're coming into spring and summer. The weather's warm. I just had a swim at the local beach. Yeah, it's good here.
Nice. Yeah. See, I need that beautiful weather all the time because New York it gets cold.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
Yeah, it gets
freezing. Our winter, Jared. Like if we have 12 degrees centigrade, which is I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but
that'd be like about 670, I guess.
That's a cold day.
Wow, 70 degrees is perfect.
I know. I'm very blessed. It's funny. I've been to New York a couple of times. When I meet people from New York, they say, "Oh, where are you from?" And they go, Australia. They go, and I think because New York's on the east side. Oh my God, that's so far. Why are you here? Why did you come here? But even people in LA do the same. They go, my God. I say, yeah, but and actually someone asked me that question when I was at Venice Beach. And I said, look, it's really just over that horizon. Like you're 12 hours in a plane over the horizon, but literally there's nothing between us. Just this, a bit of water. But then I met a lot of other Americans at TED, and widely read and widely traveled. But there seems to be a group of Americans that have never left. I think was it George Bush had never left America until he became president.
Wow.
One of the George Bushes. I don't know if that's true or not, but I think because we are down under, they call it down under. We have an urge to explore the world, but it seems that Americans are very happy where they are. In fact, they've got the whole world there anyway. There's so many.
Yeah, I think that's true. Inside the States, there's hot, there's cold, there's mountains, there's sea, there's great food. There's so much richness within the US. It makes perfect sense. You don't necessarily need to leave in order to find new stuff. There's so much inside the US, and the sort of opposite is Australia feels very remote. I know it's just over that bit of water, but it does feel like it doesn't lead to anywhere else. If you go to Australia, you kind of are at the corner of the world, whereas in Europe, you've got many other places you can go on to. But I still recommend it in Australia. Fantastic place.
Yeah, I can tell it's fantastic there. I definitely have to take a trip there. 12 hours on a plane, though.
We're about to open our borders, Jared. So you'll be welcome very soon.
Yeah, look us up. And you could, I'm in Sydney, Australia. Paul's in Brisbane. So, either of those two places.
Definitely. Okay, that sounds like a plan. I think I heard about Sydney. I think most of the time I heard about Australia, I always hear about Sydney.
Yeah, Sydney thinks of itself as the capital of Australia. It's not. It's a bit like New York and Washington. Is New York the capital of the US? Well, in many ways it is. Yes. It
feels like it. People treat it that way.
Yeah, because Sydney has the Opera House and that famous shape of the Opera, and the Harbour Bridge, which is very well known. So people naturally think of Sydney as being like the capital, and I think it's the largest city in Australia. Yeah.
Okay. All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jared. Really great to meet you. I've really enjoyed this, and have a great rest of your Sunday night.
You too. And you guys enjoy your Monday.
And I'll send you this recording, and then you can edit it, do what you need to with it.
Okay, appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Bye.